This has been a wonderfully ever-expanding group, so thanks for being here. Just consider yourselves panelists now that you're all here, and we'll make this a wonderful back and forth today. My name is Stephanie Russell. I work at the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities, and I am joined by some wonderful colleagues whom I will mention in a minute, and Father Dan McDonald, who is our anchor person, will put up on our screen, I believe. There we go. Look at that. Coming up one or two at a time. As you know, this session is a discussion on the role of religious community sponsorship of colleges and universities as a vehicle and venue for both the charism of that community and its continuance in one form or another, but also with respect to the Catholic identity of the schools. And so, as you also know, how our schools carry their identity and embody their identity is reliant to some extent, for those who are sponsored by religious communities, reliant on the charism of those communities and the particular elan that they bring to the way they find their own place in the larger Catholic community. So the way the community functions as Catholic often echoes in the way the school functions as Catholic. Not wholly, but in part. So in terms of a discussion on this, we're well aware as a group here that sponsorship means something really different in all of our schools, and it means something different in particular historical moments. That were we to go back decades, sponsorship would have meant, as we're all aware, a true ownership of our school, pre-Land O'Lakes, and owners and operators as the religious community. That there was a movement from that kind of a sponsorship to personnel. Okay, well maybe we don't own it, but we're supplying a lot of personnel, faculty and key administrators, presidents, those kinds of things. And then a movement to some funding. Well, we don't have as much personnel, but we have, the community's fund for higher education apostolates, and we will continue to fund either particular programs or the university budget overall in some percentage. And that we've moved in the last couple of decades to this language of sponsorship, which has differing definitions among our communities, and I think Dan's going to chat a little bit about that as well. But how it is that the religious community sees itself as anchoring in the institution, either through particular positions. We're going to be involved with the selection of the mission officer, or approval of the president, or reserve powers on the board, or whatever it is, how that gets anchored. Or through simply, and usually not so simple, vetting, certification, approval, processes, sort of the imprimatur of the community on the work of this particular Catholic apostolate. And our communities, women's communities, of course, started this process much, much earlier than, for example, the Jesuit schools in the room, who are currently going through an institutional mission priorities examine process. But all of us are kind of doing that, and we have a lot to learn from Catholic healthcare, from Catholic social services, not just the Catholic social services, but generally speaking, and Catholic relief. I was at a wonderful meeting a couple of years ago with representatives from all four of those sectors, leaders who were trying to create formation programs for the leadership in Catholic healthcare, Catholic relief, hospitals, and higher education that could be circulated among each other, and also to talk with each other about the particular challenges. And so, for example, Catholic relief faces some really interesting sponsorship questions, not that they're dealing with religious community, but in terms of their Catholic identity. Because they have often in the field many, 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 many more non-Christians than Christians, much less Catholics in a number of parts of the world. So the challenges are very particular to the sector, and of course we are in our own sort of sub-sectors within Catholic higher education. So our esteemed group here comes from schools who are both sponsored and in some cases not sponsored by a particular religious community, and the gifts and challenges of those are part of what they'll have a chance to share. Our frame for this conversation is a paper that Father Dan McDonald, on the other end, Jesuit, who is the provincial assistant for higher education in the Upper Midwest province of the Jesuits, that Dan created for Jesuit communities to reflect on. And I think, and you can tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think the idea that we simply cannot ever completely legislate sponsorship, that there has to be some kind of analogical imagination, some kind of generally agreed upon paradigm and image from which we're working is really a helpful thing. So we call up, of course, you know, the Dulles models of the church, or we call up all the beautiful images that Pope Francis uses on a regular basis, which often can advance our conversation far beyond, well, what is the contractual agreement between, you know, the religious community and the institution? Those are important things, but they stem from a bigger vision. So we're dealing principally with the bigger vision today than the particulars of sustaining agreements between our schools and the communities that sponsor them. And then lastly, I think it's important to note that when we speak of sponsorship, we're sometimes talking about local religious communities that are quite proximate to the apostolates with which they're working. So you may have a couple of members or a larger number of members of the sponsoring religious community living on or near your campus, in which case they tend to become the face of the community in so many ways versus the provincial office or the provincial council or team. Or they may be quite remote, often not by choice, but just, you know, by the fact that there are fewer of them. They're nationally, generally speaking, an aging group, and it's just more difficult to engage the institution on a personal basis than it used to be. So, so this group has a lot more wisdom to share than I, and I am going to cede the floor here to Dan. The last thing I just want to mention is that you're going to see me pulling out my cell phone, and that's because my clock is on it, and I'm the principal timekeeper. I am not texting my sons while I'm talking to you. Just want you to be assured that I'm in the game here. So I'm going to pass this down to Dan, who will further introduce our responders, whom we are very grateful to for participating, and who will introduce all of us to the models. Do you want me to do it? Oh, you want me to do it? Okay. So, we mentioned Dan. Wonderful. We also have to my right Father David Gentry-Akin from St. Mary's College, as you know, a department chair and faculty member there. Shannon Green, who is the director of the CSJ Institute at Mount St. Mary's University. John Sebastian, to her right, who is the Vice President for Mission and Ministry here at Loyola Marymount. Do we call it Mission and Identity or Mission and Ministry? Mission and Ministry, okay. And Daniel Rober, faculty at Sacred Heart University, also teaching in Catholic Studies. And Dr. Michael Galligan-Stierle, who is President of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities. So we are grateful for all of you. Thanks.
I asked Stephanie to do those introductions so that I get a few extra minutes. Can people hear me? I have a problem with hearing, so I don't know if the microphone's working. So, just a couple of pre-notes, and this is really to echo some of the things that Stephanie just spoke about. But this was written for Jesuit communities, okay, and a particular type of Jesuit community, those Jesuit communities with diminishing numbers, you know, who were trying to wrestle with, beyond their regular work, what kind of an identity do we have in this university, and stuff like this. It was hopefully to be an exercise for the communities, a series of conversations, really, so that the community could help define the way they want to act or be known on campus, and by extension, how they wanted to live the sponsorship that they were asked to be part of. You know? So that was the beginning of it. In 1599, that's a long time ago, the Spanish Jesuit Diego Ledesma listed 4 reasons for why the Society of Jesus involved itself in education. The first one was to give students advantages for practical living. Second reason was to contribute to the right government of public affairs. The third was to give ornament, splendor, and perfection to the rational nature of humanity. And the fourth was to be a bulwark of religion and guide people most surely and easily to the achievement of their last end, or their final end. So it was very much based on the extrapolation of the exercises. It was very much based on the way the Jesuit constitutions had permeated the educational system. In one way, shape, or form, those articles, those 4 items, are in each and every one of our mission statements at our Jesuit universities. And so that has continued over time. And I think it was something that was so infused into the formation program of Jesuits that it simply lived, and it lived without much reflection. And that's what was going on. A little side story. I taught at the Gregorian University. I worked there and did administration for 12 years. And it was as dean at one time, I often asked students what it was that a part of their education did they think that they received. What was good about their education? That one woman said to me, "I received a Jesuit education." And I said, "What might you mean by that?" And we always had to use the conditional over there whenever we were talking or engaging. She said, "Well, I was taught by Jesuits." And then there was a pause, and she said, "And of course, Cardinal Ratzinger." And I said, Cardinal Ratzinger had been gone from the Gregorian for 2 years when you got here. So, and she looked at me as if I were some kind of slow child. And she said, "And of course, I was also educated by Karl Rahner and Bernard Lonergan. Mm-hmm. I went to school with 23 saints, 50 blessed, 16 popes, and the vast majority of the leadership of the church, 900 bishops." Now, she said this to me. Mm-hmm. And of course, I said, "Well, she read the website, you know." And finally, she said, "Well, this is the Pope's University, so I am a leader now in the church." That is a Jesuit education. Of course, I didn't know if I had just received one of the most profound statements about time and history that I could have imagined, or if I was dealing with somebody I should step back from. It was probably both. But she had this greater sense of leadership in the church than I did. She saw it as an historical continuum, you know. What she called attention to is something that I think is in this first picture over here. What we used to refer to in the society as the long black line. Now, I may be wrong, but it looks like the first 6 rows on either side are Jesuits in cassocks. Mm-hmm. And they all have pretty young hair. There's not much, you know, it's a whole different picture. You know, we talk about the graying of the Society of Jesus and so on and so forth. But it was that long black line that carried much of the ideas within our institutions. And assumptions were made about that by people and for people, and assumptions were made in the Society of Jesus about that and what it might mean. And, you know, we were not so intentional about what we were doing. And we certainly had become less intentional in the States. When I returned, I really thought they were going to let me move into retirement, but no such luck in the society. So I was asked to be the provincial assistant for higher education. And what that has led me to are some really wonderful encounters with our institutions and the ability to sit back and help people think about who they are and what they're doing. It was also very clear that the universities had changed. They had changed in some substantial ways, and their organization had changed significantly over those 12 years I was gone. So that's not to say that these movements had not been going on before, but they weren't as prominent at that time. And what was it? There was a whole organizational culture and an intentional, credentialed culture now going on at the Jesuit universities. What were the intentional aspects? There was a philosophy that was articulated. There were values that you saw in literature or on walls or websites or whatever. There was a vision statement now. I mean, I didn't even know what a vision statement was when I came back. I thought it was more like that woman I've been talking to. There were mission statements. All of the Jesuit universities had a mission statement by that time. There were goals. And they weren't just the goals that the higher education system was setting for them. There were goals that they were articulating for themselves. There was an intentional focus on Catholic identification, and there was an intention on what did it mean to be Jesuit. And so the universities became, in some ways, a model in themselves. What did I mean by that? They're an integrated set of assumptions and beliefs about the way things are, the purpose for activities, and the way institutions should be, that is to say, act internally and externally. In these organizations, it became evident to me that we have 6 schools in the upper Midwest, and there were 5 different models that were going on. What were those? There were autocratic institutions, there were custodial, and those were based on power coming from the top down. Custodial, somehow they believed that they were entrusted with keeping areas of life alive, educational life. There were supportive. These were ones that had to do more with an interaction with leadership and participation on the part of those working there and studying there. There were collegial places that had more of a sense of partnership. And then there were system organizations, which had to do with really very much motivation and trust that was built within the system. Needed in all these, and by the way, those models were echoed in various parts of the university, and if you had an authority one, you might have a completely different one in another department or area. So, but what was going on in those kinds of ways of acting? Teamwork, reliability of people to work together. These crossed all of these different models. The innovation is essential, constantly, and open communication needed to be there, and decisions should be reached through participation with and of the players. Lifelong learning was something else that was it was a way of talking, it was a narrative within the institution that came to, the importance of that. And the values that are present and the desirability of certain goals were also within each of these different kind of models. What all of these point to was the organization system had moved along these lines, and the Jesuit community had not necessarily been part of this except in their departments or with friendships in the university community or with administrative roles. All of them, I noticed, worked hard, well, most of them, worked hard at their particular discipline or administrative area. But they did not often have a sense of working collectively as the Jesuits working collectively, as would, for example, campus ministry or faculty senate or things like this. So there wasn't that sense or feeling. So as I went around, one of my parts of my job is to interview the Jesuits also, and to see what they're thinking. I found a lot of them to be kind of sad about feeling that they've lost something, that they didn't know really how they were supposed to be in the university except to work hard and be in their area and do what they were supposed to be doing. And so the question occurred is, how might they begin to think of themselves collectively? Is that something that's worthwhile doing? You know, and so that's what I put together these possibilities. I must say that everyone in our universities who've seen these models, they get enthused about them, but there has not been one conversation in community life about that. Brian Paulson, the provincial of the Upper Midwest Province, this past year, October, I believe it was, there's a meeting of the higher education rectors, and he passed this out. And it generated a lot of interest, but my understanding is it's not been engaged by any of the Jesuit communities. And maybe it shouldn't be, but it offers some possibilities, some ways of thinking about the community and their presence on the university campuses, and how that might also be something that other parts of the university would find helpful to think about. What is our role here? If we're going to be collaborative, for example, that one model, what kind of images do we want to embrace about ourselves to make that live and to be animated? And how can we be animated with our presence in the university? So the exercise was titled this: what is the role of the Jesuit community at your university? Simple title. There were 7 models I put together, and there are a whole bunch of questions. The panel has witnessed all the questions. I mean, you have to, with Jesuits, sort of give very, very precise directions, and then they'll think of 100 more questions. So it covers a lot of setting the stage issues and stuff like that. So what are these possible models? There's one, the nostalgic partner. The community yearns for a more central, comprehensive role in the life of the university, as was once the case with regard to leadership, decision-making, teaching and scholarship, and student services. It was a comprehensive look. Hope endures that Jesuit centrality will return at some point, and there are places that really believe that there's going to be this magical, long black line that's returning. There were 125 Jesuits teaching at the Gregorian. Don't tell any of the provincials that. No. They want to take them, and they're into this role. And they're Jesuits who really believe that it's going to somehow return. Secondly, the missionary partner. As the university has become a more secular institution, the Jesuit community sees itself as an apostolic unit in an environment that is no longer a Jesuit ministry, but a place where Jesuits minister. The third one, a contractual partner. And I've got a sheet to pass these out at the end. So the community is one of many bargaining partners within the university. It still has a most favored status given the history of the institution, and that's important given the history of the institution. But it needs to continually negotiate its role with regard to enforcement of policies and procedures that advance its apostolic mission. The community relates to the institution in corporate ways such as annual contracts and basic agreements of understanding. Part of this model would be the ambulance going around to repair and fix things that might be there going wrong. The fourth one, covenant partner. The relationship between the Jesuit community and the university is more than a contractual one. It is a covenant between a founding religious brotherhood and secular partners. The community is highly regarded and is influential, since the objectives of the institution and the community are the same. The community provides ongoing support and inspiration. The fifth, as the universe partner in joint Ignatian ministry, as the university has become more complex and incorporated as a secular institution, the role of the community has become more specialized. Jesuits now think of themselves as co-workers, as members of a ministerial team that includes many non-Jesuits as collaborators in a joint ministry. As team members, Jesuits provide knowledge, skills, and commitments that are essential to maintaining the religious character of the institution. They are to be seen as senior partners when the religious character of the institution is at issue, since they are the animators and guardians of the core religious mission at the heart of the institution. Selected partner, that role. Given fewer Jesuits available to serve in higher education and a large number of Jesuit universities, the Society might consider both more restrictive and more expanded roles for Jesuit communities. At some institutions, Jesuit roles would be restricted, perhaps to campus ministry and or offices in ministry and mission. At other institutions, roles would be more expansive, to also include top-level university leadership as well as teaching and scholarship. And I must tell you, with this role, there are 5 of our Jesuit universities who believe that they should receive all of the second part of it. So some of the universities, they're already thinking that they're the ones that should be promoted with more expansive numbers of Jesuits. Animators of the mission. The Jesuit community helps to guide the various groups within the university. They help them learn about the Jesuit and Catholic nature of the university. They initiate conversations as well as suggest and propose points of view within the tradition of the Society of Jesus and its institutions. They help shape opinions and guide the digestion of information about the university and its history. The community elaborates on the relationship of the Society to the institution and the province. The community helps to clarify the relationships between the Jesuit Catholic history and its present culture. Finally, the community is tasked with energizing and prodding the institution to action or decisions necessary to its future understanding of the tradition. Again, the idea on these was to begin conversations. Would people embrace one of these? My guess, knowing Jesuits, is no. But there might be parts of each of these that they might want to engage. So with that, we'll...
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to begin with some responses from our panelists. And because he has the broadest national view of the schools, I'm going to ask Michael Galligan-Stierle to kick us off maybe and kind of give us the big picture, and then we'll look at specific institutions.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Didn't sound like it was on.
It is.
It is. Okay, great. Special thanks to Father McDonald for sharing the diagnostic tool within the paper titled, "What is the Role of the Jesuit Community at Your University?" And I look forward to hear the respondents here and their wise insights. With over 200 Catholic colleges and universities founded by religious communities in the United States, more tools like this will help strengthen Catholic identity and university mission, as well as deepen the bonds of love and apostolic zeal of men and women religious on our campuses, if in fact they use them. In short, I love the concept of a religious community at a university campus using a diagnostic tool to articulate their, quote, ideal type as a way to be deliberate about their presence on campus. Naming the ideal and matching it up against the real is one of the most effective ways to improve. Self-reflection that clarifies the path forward is indispensable for anyone's spiritual journey. My brief comments this morning will be a sharing of some personal life learnings, and I hope that the learnings of my journey might help illuminate yours. Avery Dulles' 1974 book, Models of the Church, identified 5 ways people experience church: institution, mystical communion, sacrament, herald, and servant. Built on scripture and life experience, Dulles' book assisted many believers with a way to articulate the changes and divisions that emerged after Vatican II. He gave us categories that resonated with reality, and I think Father McDonald does the same here. In the 70s, I taught a January term class called Experiencing Christian Community, wherein students studied communal living arrangements. We visited and heard talks from hippies living in a commune articulate their ideals, as well as the real-life experience of living together. We visited and heard from Jesuits and Sisters of Mercy, who identified their community ideals and discussed some of the practical outcomes of living together. The real learning for participants happened when we engaged one another and identified the characteristics we wanted to live as a class: to pray, play, discuss, and serve. And then we moved in together for a week to live together and try and see if the ideal communal life would work. As you can imagine, the real and the ideal were not exactly aligned. But I can testify that that experience of living together and reflecting upon it was transformative for those students. Father McDonald's method of critical reflection engages community members in a similar way here. In the 80s, my sacred scripture studies led me to realize that the four gospel writers each advanced a different portrait of Jesus. The Markan Jesus was down to earth, hot-tempered, a real person. Luke's Jesus was spirit-leading to the marginalized, women, the poor, those with physical ailments. The Matthean Jesus fulfilled the law and the messianic prophecies, and his Jesus had many of the characteristics of Abraham, Moses, and David. Just a little bit better. And lastly, John's Jesus advanced love like no other, and was so united in and through love with the Father and Son as to be indistinguishable. As a Christian, I was called upon to reflect how I would live the Christian life. Which of the ideal images of Jesus could I make real in my life? The life challenge presented by Father McDonald to evaluate and make choices is similar here. In the 90s, I learned through my generational studies that for those of the silent generation, God was viewed more like a prudential rock. Think Ten Commandments. For the boomers, God was imaged as the one who journeyed with you. Think here, Road to Emmaus. For Gen Xers, God was invested in the personal care of the individual. Think here, Zacchaeus. And for the millennials, God was more the servant leader, a God of compassion. Think here maybe Good Shepherd. Father McDonald recognizes that Jesuits have gone through the spiritual exercises, but each has a very different approach to embracing their role at the university. His community reflection exercises engages them in articulating that reality. In the 2000s, I read a book by Grant and Vanderburg's Partners in the Between Time, Creating Sponsorship Capacity. The authors note a paradigm shift being embraced by religious communities regarding their canonical sponsorship responsibilities. They advance the concept that the theological and communitarian dimensions of sponsorship necessary for continued sacramental perspective will necessitate preparing the next generation of sponsors. The religious will need to engage in grief work and the work of change management. Lay assuming new roles will come in many shapes and sizes. The passionate pioneer, the resigned supporter, the late bloomer, the critical observer, the conscientious objector, the puzzled and perplexed. Grant and Vanderburg underline the fact that the religious community and the new lay adherents we'll need to look closely at the ideal and the real dimensions of this sponsorship realignment. Implicitly, Father McDonald hints that this will be necessary. The Catholic Jesuit concept of cura personalis, which translates as the care of the whole person, suggests individualized attention to the needs of others. Recently, the concept of care of the whole institution has emerged. Father McDonald addresses the issue of sponsorship in the Catholic University through the lens of the role of the religious community. I want to suggest another approach that builds on Father McDonald's idea. What if we were to move the Catholic University front and center rather than the sponsoring religious community? To do that, we would ask ourselves, what is the ideal and what is the real embodiment of Ex Corde Ecclesiae's 4 characteristics of a Catholic university? Imagine a religious community or a group of lay collaborators assessing their effectiveness over against these 4 dimensions of a Catholic university. Does it inspire Christian values? When you go here, are you inspired or not? Does it honor faith and reason? Is there any real connection that's going on in the classroom on these topics? Embody the Catholic way. Can you visibly see Catholics living the Catholic life? Serve all in their search for meaning, making, and transcendence. We're serving all. Are we helping them see their transcendent horizon? So how does or doesn't the Jesuit community inspire Christian values? In what ways could they actively bring together faith and reason? What would embodying a Catholic liturgical and moral life look like? How might they do that more effectively? Using the framework of the ideal and the real, how are the Jesuits helping the university community search for and find meaning-making in the life's journey in the midst of the ordinary? Do they want to do more? And if so, how? In conclusion, any experience, and I mean that, any experience of reflecting on the differential between the ideal and real regarding the spiritual journey is worthwhile. Given the religious community's location embodied within a Catholic university, a case can be made that focusing first on the work rather than the compositional framework of the original community could be profitable for those at the community, at the university. However, either way you go, I don't think you can go wrong with reflecting. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts regarding this very most important topic.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful, and I think it might be best if we just sort of continue down the table. I should have said about Daniel Rober that he is once again appearing as himself.
At a theater near you.
At a theater near you, he'll be signing autographs after, and so we'll ask you to share your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this panel and to represent today is more symbol than sacrament, perhaps. My esteemed colleague and chair, Dr. Michelle Loris, who was originally slated to appear in this panel. Before commenting on the models found in Father McDonald's piece and how they relate to our context, I'd like to make a few comments about the unique history and charism of Sacred Heart University, as well as our mission today. I brought copies of our mission and vision statement, which just came out. These comments will help to contextualize the approach that I take to the models. So, Sacred Heart University is relatively young as Catholic colleges and universities go. It was founded in 1963 by Bishop Walter Curtis, who had become Bishop of Bridgeport in 1961, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Bishop Curtis was inspired by the Second Vatican Council and his embrace of the laity. He was really inspired by this. Particularly evident in the Constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, which would come out in 1964. So as a result, Bishop Curtis decided he wanted to found a lay-run school rather than a diocesan institution. A number of diocesan institutions have been founded in the previous 15, 20 years or so. University of San Diego, University of Dallas being prominent examples of this. He decided he wanted to found a lay school. So in this sense, Bishop Curtis was very much ahead of his time. So 4 years in front of the push at Land O'Lakes for lay control, and then the resultant transfer of many religious order schools to lay boards of trustees. So Sacred Heart had a lay board of trustees with legates from the bishop. I think there are 2 legates currently, but who do not have a controlling stake of the board. They are there. So Sacred Heart was initially founded to appeal to students in the local commuting area who might otherwise not be able to afford college. It began with 150 students and 9 faculty recruited from Marquette. And has grown in recent decades to 8,500 students, 5,000 undergrads, and 281 full-time faculty within 5 colleges. So the university has managed to grow its student body in the last decade while keeping admissions competitive in the context of shrinking Northeast college-age cohorts in a way that almost no other regional Catholic school has been able to match. So this brings me to Father McDonald's models and how they fit into thinking about a lay-run school. So again, Sacred Heart's history of mission is somewhat unique, and thus the relationship of our Catholic mission and identity to these models is also unique. Since we lack a founding religious community and the related language for thinking about mission, Sacred Heart has positioned the Catholic intellectual tradition as the core charism of its mission. This is most fully realized in the Catholic intellectual tradition seminars discussed in Michelle's paper yesterday, which are required of every student and which are the university's signature common core, as well as in the work of the Office of Mission and Catholic Identity, which presents the annual presidential seminar in the Catholic intellectual tradition for faculty, as well as a lecture series called Contemporary Catholic Conversations. So the 3 models that I think most effectively apply to our situation, thinking broadly about the way kind of the Catholic intellectual tradition and the Catholic community in the university function are missionary partner, covenant partner, and partner in joint ministry, of course, not Ignatian ministry in this case. So for an institution that's just over 50 years old, I think nostalgia, for example, has less resonance than for a school, for example, 3 times that age, right? So I went to Fordham University for my PhD, which is over 175 years old. That's a very different context than a university that's barely over 50 years old. On the same point, many of the key facets of our Catholic identity, such as our chapel, which is pictured at the front of our brochure here, and the aforementioned seminars in the Catholic intellectual tradition are quite new. So they're not holdovers from a past. They are, in fact, new expressions of the Catholic identity of the university. Some other models I find here are also based more on situations such as that of the Jesuits and others in which there is a founding order or institution that is in some kind of dialogue with the institution. For us, this is not the case, as all who are involved in decisions about mission are located firmly within the institution and are not also affiliated with some kind of parallel or integrated other body, such as a religious order. So none of these models, of course, as Father McDonald discusses, fully sums up the way that we engage our mission, but I do think some are more helpful than others. So let me just turn briefly to those and to talk about how I see those fitting within our context. So the model of missionary partner fits very well, I think, the kind of work we do at Sacred Heart, given particularly that we now work in the most secular region of the United States. New England surpassed the Pacific Northwest a couple of years ago for this title. We cannot take for granted that students have a robust affiliation with or interest in the church or any other religious body. And so we're putting the Catholic intellectual tradition before them in these required seminars in an invitational way, allowing them to connect the great ideas of this tradition to their lives, and perhaps to see elements of this tradition or elements of human experience, in fact, that were not present in their upbringing. There's also a covenant aspect to what we do, and this is particularly the case, I think, in our relationship with the faculty. Many faculty come to us without much knowledge of Catholicism or Catholic universities, much in the way that Dan talked about yesterday in his context. So programming such as the faculty conversations, required periodic discussion groups for first-year full-time faculty, as well as the aforementioned presidential seminar, which has a cohort of 10 faculty engaging year-long conversations about the Catholic intellectual tradition, and it's requiring a project at the end, which has been in place for over 15 years, allow faculty to learn about and dialogue with the Catholic intellectual tradition, again, in an invitational manner that's free of pressure. But they often find it enlightening, I think, as to perhaps prejudices they may have had about Catholicism and the Catholic intellectual tradition that they're able to kind of work through in a collegial atmosphere. At the same time, particularly in the ministry aspects of the university, we've taken on a partnership model, especially in an interreligious sense. Our mission and ministry team now includes a rabbi and imam on staff who minister to students and take part in the life of the university. They actually came to the Theology on Tap I presented at a couple of weeks ago, and the imam, of course, did not imbibe, but they kind of stole the show, actually, with their questions, so it was quite talking about how secularization affects their communities. So they're very involved with the community in that way. Our ties with the local Jewish community, rooted in the Second Vatican Council document Nostra Aetate, have deepened throughout the years and are very strong. So we've thus learned to embrace the religious diversity of our students, faculty, and staff from the perspective of the Catholic intellectual tradition, at the same time as we offer curriculum, events, and lectures which deepen and extend the ongoing conversation of the Catholic intellectual tradition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John Sebastian.
Good morning, everyone. Let me preface what I'm going to say by acknowledging that my affiliation with this particular institution, Loyola Marymount, is of much shorter vintage than that of many of the folks in the room. So if you hear audible groans or see people grimacing in response to anything I say, you should ask them later for the actual information, because I've only been on the job here for about 9 months. Loyola Marymount is a particularly interesting case study, I think, for this conversation because of the nature of our sponsorship, which is here tripartite. So this year we mark the 50th anniversary of the arrival of Marymount on this site alongside Loyola, and in 5 years we'll celebrate the 50th anniversary of the formal merger into Loyola Marymount University. And then there's our poor third, oft forgotten because they're not in the name, Sisters of St. Joseph of Arch. So we are sponsored by the Society of Jesus, the Religious for the Sacred Heart of Mary, and the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. If you look across the way, you'll see the CSJ Center for Reconciliation and Justice, a floor below us. If you look across the way, you'll see the Marymount Institute there. And the Society has actually also likewise endowed an institute or a center for Ignatian spirituality. So one of the ways in which all of these three are visible for us are in these three endowed centers, which are meant to, I think, be lasting testaments to their charism, to their particular spirituality as we engage in these conversations and in the reality of dwindling numbers on our campus. What ties the three together, or the accommodation that we have come to over the years, I think, is this notion that Ignatian spirituality animates all three of these in various ways, despite different emphases in each. So the Marymount Sisters have really focused, and the Institute focuses in recent years, on the intersections of faith and culture and the arts, and how those come together, as is evident from the name of the CSJ Center down there. They're really focused on reconciliation and justice. I was having a conversation with some of our Sisters of St. Joseph recently. We were talking about the emphasis in the last couple of general congregations that the Society has held on the importance of reconciliation, and this three-part reconciliation with God, with one another, and with the created world. And one of the sisters said, well, it's about time the Jesuits finally caught up to the rest of us, because they've been working on reconciliation, on justice in this sense for a long time. So the thread that really binds these all together is that idea of Ignatian spirituality. I think what makes LMU an interesting test case for this kind of conversation is that in many ways our three orders are in different phases in all of this. In her opening remarks, Stephanie talked about the way in which sponsorship varies from institution to institution, and even within institutions in different historical moments. Here we have really different setups simultaneously across across these three, and I'll offer some observations in a moment about where I think each of them may be. But what I think is noteworthy is that for us, we have them almost sort of operating sequentially, and so we can sort of learn from each order where they are in their history, how we might gracefully proceed along this path. So at this point in time, despite the name, there are effectively no religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary working full-time at the university at this point in time. They engage in various ways. They maintain a presence on our board of trustees, for example. Of course, as I said, the institute is here, but you will not normally come across an RSHM in the course of your day at Loyola Marymount University. The Sisters of St. Joseph are about 5 in number on campus, in full and part-time work in campus ministry, in staffing the center, in teaching in one instance. But certainly their presence is on the wane, and one expects that their total absence is not very far down the line. The Jesuit community, by comparison, remains fairly robust, especially when compared to Jesuit communities at other institutions sponsored by the Society in the United States, other universities. But certainly there too, the reality is that the size is diminishing, the age is increasing. We have one of the so-called young Jesuits in the room today. This is the subset of 8 Jesuits who are under the age of 65 in the community. That's the cutoff for young, is 65. So we're looking at an aged community. And I think for us, there's a real opportunity to think about how we enter these different phases of the life cycle of the sponsoring orders by really looking at the 3 of them in their totality. Using Father McDonald's models, I think I could posit, if I were going to, and I am, that the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange really function as a kind of a missionary partner in the sense that they were never really the sponsoring order behind either of the 2 institutions that eventually merged. They've had a kind of a different relationship all along. So they remain a kind of a ministry within something else that is not really fundamentally theirs in that sense. The RSHMs, by the nature of their almost complete absence at this point in time, really, I think, fall into that category of contractual partner. We continue to think with them and negotiate with them and seek formal relationships between that group and the university, but often that's really the level that we sort of function at, is how do we understand their presence here. The Society is, I think, a more interesting case, and I think there are any number of categories that we could land them in, and I think there are others that they aspire to be part of, and again, this is really where you should look to Sean to see if he's grunting or grimacing as I attempt to speak on behalf of the Jesuits a little bit here. Certainly, I think the covenant partner model is a reasonable one for them. There is a kind of covenant between the founding religious brotherhood here and its secular partners. The community is highly regarded and is influential since their objectives and the objectives of the university merge, and they continue to provide that ongoing support and inspiration. I think there's a way in which they aspire, and we all aspire, to have the Society be partners in that joint Ignatian ministry. We've done a lot of work here, as many schools have done in the last few years, in really trying to engage our lay colleagues in taking on that mantle. But I think we have not yet figured out how we do that as a truly joint effort, as one that is fully collaborative in that sense. And I think that's what we hope to accomplish going forward. The last thing I'll say about this is that the tripartite sponsorship here does what I think Michael Galligan-Stierle alludes to in the end of his talk, in really helping to foreground the Catholic University sort of ahead of and against the particular charisms behind it. Because we have to find the common threads in order to avoid overemphasizing or de-emphasizing one or the other of these 3 groups, we have tended to talk about the Catholic university here and the Catholic character of this place. Having been associated previously either as student and or teacher at 3 other Jesuit institutions, one of the great surprises to me in this first year here is the extent to which we talk about Big C Catholic on this campus in a way that other Jesuit institutions sometimes de-emphasize for the sake of Big J Jesuit and maybe small c Catholic. But here, there's really a sense that this is a Catholic university as a way of avoiding saying it's a Jesuit university or a Marymount university or any of these terms that can be somewhat exclusive. And so I think that's something that we try to assert here. It has manifested itself in our hosts in the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination, which has really kind of taken center stage here. It's partly an historical development too, I think, going back to our first lay president about 8 years ago, who was not only the first lay president, but the first non-Catholic president of this institution. And so there was a kind of doubling down on what does make us Catholic, if it isn't even the top of the leadership heap. So I think that's a conversation that we're engaged in here and continuing to think about. And I do think for us, it's a way forward as we both struggle to figure out how to maintain the presence of all three orders, and at the same time figure out still, 50 years on, how they interact in a kind of a more seamless fashion. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I shared with Father Dan yesterday that my first entree into Catholic higher education was at Loyola University Chicago, where I was a campus minister for 6 years. But since 2010, I have worked for universities that were founded by women's religious communities, and that will be reflected in my remarks this morning. I work at the other Catholic university in this town of Los Angeles. Actually, there are two others, Mount St. Mary's University, and we are founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. So a different congregation, just for clarity, of the CSJs of Orange. So the same family, same initials, same history, but two separate congregations. We call each other cousins. In fact, they call us the lemons, and we call them the oranges. So lots of love there. So I would like to take this opportunity to brag about my institution and to paint a picture of the current state of sponsorship, the involvement of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and then I'll comment briefly on the models as well. So we were founded in 1925, and we are the only women's university in Los Angeles, and the sisters founded the college to, quote, educate the daughters of Los Angeles. And we love that term, and we proudly continue that mission to this day. So to contextualize how we measure up to the models, please let me share a little bit about us. Our student body is 90% female, 58% Latina, 80% overall students of color. We reflect the city that we serve. More than half of our students are in healthcare-related majors, and we have one of the oldest nursing programs in the state of California. In a new index published by the New York Times last year, Mount St. Mary's ranked #1 out of 578 private colleges in economic mobility, meaning 43% of our students will advance 2 income quintiles based on their university education. And we rank 3rd overall in this index in the state of California, behind Cal State LA. We are very proud of what we do, and we are clear that we are deeply rooted in the vision of our sponsors, the Sisters of St. Joseph, who from their very first foundation in 1650 worked to restore dignity and flourishing to the lives of women and girls. Our founders continue to sponsor the Mount, holding reserve powers, occupying seats on the board, although this current canonical structure of sponsorship, as we have all discussed, it's being assessed for its sustainability. That's a discussion for another time. But we've welcomed our first lay president in 2000, Jacqueline Powers Dowd, and our second and current lay president, Anne McElhaney Johnson, in 2011, and they are both well-formed Catholic intellectuals. We currently have 1 sister serving full-time on the faculty, 1 part-time faculty, 1 part-time serving as a program director, and 1 working part-time in campus ministry. The Provincial Mother House is located on the same property as our Chelan campus, and about 100 of the 290 still living sisters reside there and receive varying levels of nursing care. I've been at the Mount for just over 2 years, and while I was not surprised to learn that we do not have many sisters working there, I was a bit stunned to learn how many of our sisters have PhDs and taught on the faculty. But after Vatican II left the college for missions in Peru, or ran for public office, or became lawyers, or founded social service agencies, or moved to the Valley to work with Cesar Chavez. Those who stayed at the college, very fine scholars, other than a handful of them, have all retired or died. We so love and respect our sisters, and they continue to inspire us and advise us. And many longtime faculty and staff still miss their presence and comment on it regularly. Yet the sisters feel they left this ministry in our hands long ago. We are long past the time that sisters have led our institutions, and we are fast approaching the time when our sisters may no longer be able to even serve on boards in the numbers needed to meet the current sponsorship requirements. Of all the models Father Dan has proposed, the covenantal one resonates most clearly with our institution. I chose this one because covenants are relationships, and these relationships require deep trust by all parties. The university's leadership and that of the CSJs have worked on this relationship for years. Mistakes have been made, but which have led to some misunderstandings and resentments on both sides, but they've stuck with it through the years. And it is out of this sacred trust that the CSJ Institute was born just over 2 years ago, to ensure that our CSJ character, or distinctiveness, if you will, is both preserved and advanced. There was no mission officer or mission office separate at the Mount, and the CSJ Institute is the first department on campus to try to institutionalize mission and charism. So we're housed in the office of the president and charged with, quote, advancing the CSJ mission to serve all persons without distinction, respond to the needs of the times, and to prepare fearless visionaries for a just future. So to this end, we have launched an oral history project of the sisters, created an online course, sent pilgrimages to our foundations in France, and given faculty research grants in a variety of disciplines to advance original research on the mission and charism. We see now that our sisters have entrusted this ministry to us, and we've been in that process for years. It is such a privilege to witness the grace and freedom of our sisters in this transition, as they remind us that the sisters don't own the charism. The Spirit imparts these charisms, not religious communities. And while they do not impart it to us, the sisters are the ones who can best recognize it when it is manifest. And we often talk about if any charism is needed in our world today, unifying love certainly is one of those. And as long as the charism is needed, the Spirit will continue to give it. So if I may be so bold as to propose another model that we are moving towards, if not already dwelling in as we move on from the covenant, and that is the model of inheritance. The faculty, staff, and administration and students, we are the heirs to this expression of the mission and charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph. But inheritance requires a full giving over, a complete letting go of what is to come next in the lineage of this tradition. And I dare say one of the greatest challenges of the model of being heirs is what full inheritance really looks like. We've been speaking in the church for years now in terms of partners in ministry and being co-workers in the vineyard, and yet we have not quite crossed this threshold of full inheritance just yet. But time and demographics make this inevitable. This reality is much more fluid. Without vowed members, it is easy to fear that all will be lost. Over the course of my own career as a lay minister, I have worked with no fewer than 6 religious communities with 6 different charisms and apostolates. We get new jobs, we move on. So what does a lay commission to mission and charism look like? Because of the unusual boom of numbers of religious in the US is still fresh in our collective memory, it's easy to be nostalgic and seek some kind of restoration of these models of the past. But as the late Sister Mary Ellsburn, social ethicist, taught her students, the Holy Spirit is that of God which draws us into the future. So we must trust that the Spirit is calling us and gifting us and drawing us into the future of Catholic higher education, and that it will continue to unfold. And for us at the Mount, that call is to love, a love that makes no distinction, a love that is bold and courageous, so that all may be one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was very moving. Wow.
We're very proud.
No, I just think about what we're losing with the passing away of our women religious is just incalculable. Such an enormous loss.
Steffi, can you hear him in the back? You might just pick up the mic.
Okay. No, I said it's what we're losing with the passing away of our sisters is just incalculable. It's such an enormous loss. I wonder if many of the leaders of our church really appreciate what we're losing. It is incalculable to me. Anyway, as is so often the case, as depicted here, women are way ahead of the men on all these issues. So my story will not be quite as hopeful as the one you just heard. St. Mary's College of California was founded in 1863 by Archbishop Joseph Alemany, who was the Dominican missionary archbishop of the region. He founded it, actually, St. Ignatius College had been founded in 1855, which eventually became the University of San Francisco. However, Archbishop Alemany was upset with the Jesuits because they were poaching all of the vocations. And he needed diocesan priests to staff his parishes. So he founded St. Mary's College, and it was initially staffed by diocesan priests, and of course offered a plethora of different programs and so forth as quickly as they were able to ramp up in those areas. But his primary concern was to send young men there to study, and with the hope that they would eventually be ordained diocesan priests to staff the parishes in the region. Anyway, from the beginning, he had wanted Christian brothers, De La Salle Christian brothers, to come and staff the college because he knew of their great reputation as educators. And the brothers kept putting him off. They didn't really have anyone to send. And eventually in 1868, they sent some brothers, and the brothers assumed responsibility for the direction of the college. And of course that pattern continued with generations of long black lines up until the 1970s, actually. And as we rehearse the history of Catholic higher ed in the last 50 years, we know that that was a watershed time with the Land of Lakes Statement and various other things. And St. Mary's started to want to open the windows and sort of emerge from the Catholic ghetto and so forth that many people perceived had characterized an earlier era. So we began to hire all kinds of people without asking a lot of mission questions. The brothers felt there would always be enough brothers to be able to be the iconic representation of the mission and to be the guarantors of the mission. And so we started hiring lots of people and developing lots of different kinds of programs. And I think what the brothers didn't realize was that very shortly thereafter, the bottom was going to fall out of vocations, and the brothers were going to rapidly decline in number. So if you look at college yearbooks from the 1960s, you'll see the college itself was much smaller at the time, about 1,000 students. But when you look at the faculty, you'll see that more than half of them are brothers. And then a smattering of other very dedicated lay colleagues, women and men, who staffed the college through those years. Now, the picture is very, very different. We have 15 brothers living on campus, but most of those brothers are retired. They continue to provide tutoring to students who need tutoring and to be very important mentors to many of our students, especially our first generation students, in whom they take a special interest. But in terms of their active involvement in the institution, we have just one brother under the age of 65 who teaches in the history department, and then a couple of brothers in their 70s who teach part-time in the theology department. One brother who is, I don't know his exact age, but he's clearly over 75, who works in the library. And that is about the extent of the brothers' involvement in the day-to-day life of the campus. So, our situation is very unusual in the sense that the California province of the Brothers of the Christian Schools never handed over ownership of the institution to a lay board of trustees. So we are still owned, lock, stock, and barrel, by a corporation made up entirely of Christian brothers. There are 15 brothers who are all members of the California province who own the college. The problem is that those brothers are advancing in age. Many of them are very disengaged from the life of the college. Many of them have never been missioned to the college. So they aren't familiar with the day-to-day life of the place. They come from all over the province. Many of them have had careers as very fine high school educators, but they haven't necessarily had much exposure to collegiate life or to the kinds of issues that come up in collegiate life. So those 15 brothers own the college. and they are the ones who hold the reserve powers. Then we have a board of trustees made up of about 25 or so people, and on that board there are about 5 brothers at any one point in time, not all of whom are on the corporation. Some of those brothers come from across the United States. Some of them are coming from other Lasallian institutions of higher education. So the corporation, which owns the college, is mandated in their bylaws to meet once a year. So they have a meeting once a year, which seems to have very little impact on the day-to-day life of the institution. When one talks to brothers who are on the corporation and who are sometimes very frustrated with the direction of the institution, you'll hear them sometimes jokingly talk about the nuclear option. And what they mean is that they could decide tomorrow to sell all of the assets, to close down the institution, to sell all of the assets, and to do something else with the money. What is lacking is some incremental steps that we might take prior to the nuclear option, okay? So what you have, the present reality, is that our 15 brothers or so, I would say, are very much in the midst of a grieving process, very much so. And there are some of the older faculty on the campus who've been around a while, who remember, faculty and staff, who remember a time when the brothers, the ethos of the brothers permeated the place in a way that was palpable and felt. And many of those faculty and staff are nostalgic for that time, and they regret the passing away of the brothers. We lost one of our most iconic brothers this past January. Deeply, deeply beloved man. Brother Dominic Baradelli was his name. And he was iconic. You know, I mean, people, consecrated women and men live out their vocations in very different ways. But when people thought of what it meant to be a Christian brother, Brother Dominic was the person who would often come to mind, because he embodied that in such a deep and profound way in his relationships and his care and treatment of the individual and so forth. Very much identified with our first generation students, with our Latino students, you know, with students coming from impoverished backgrounds, very much seeking to accompany them on their journey, always going out and begging donors for money to try to help this student or that student be able to stay in school, that sort of thing. Just a beautiful, beautiful soul, one of the most beautiful people you could ever hope to meet. So we lost him in January. And among the brothers who are there now, you have Brother Mel Anderson, our President Emeritus, who served for 28 years. He walks around the campus now. He'll be 90 in September. He walks around the campus, and you can see in his eyes, you can see the grief that he's living, because the brothers have essentially lost control of the place in terms of being an animating spirit on a day-to-day basis. We've hired lots and lots of lay faculty over the years, of course, to staff all these programs, and they're competent in their fields, but many of them have absolutely no felt appreciation for what the brothers represented. They sort of see the brothers as this odd group of elderly bachelors, you know, who never found the right woman or whatever. You know, they just see them as a sort of an oddity, something, you know, a carryover from a past that they do not understand. And we don't have any mechanism for trying to hire Catholic intellectuals, as I talked about yesterday, for trying to hire people who might be able to replace in some meaningful way the people that we're losing. We don't have a mechanism for trying to do that. And so, for example, when we underwent a review of our core curriculum a few years ago, there was a great sentiment among the lay faculty to eliminate the theology and religious studies requirement, which at present is 2 courses that the students must take. And what you heard at a lot of the faculty assemblies were remarks like, well, many of the students that we might want to attract to a place like St. Mary's are put off by that requirement. And so they're not going to come here, they're going to go to other places. And what a remark like that betrays is the fact that the people making those remarks don't understand the first thing about what this institution was founded to be about. And so you have really a lot of our lay faculty, they're good people. You know, I don't mean to be bad-mouthing them, but because they didn't have any experience of Catholic education growing up, they haven't been formed in this tradition. They go on to secular schools and colleges and universities. So that's the model that they carry around in their heads. We live in the backyard of UC Berkeley and Stanford, and so when we hire people to come and work at St. Mary's, they think of it as a little backwater place, and they think of the brothers as holding us back from the future that we might embrace. And their image, the image that they're carrying in their head, is one of the institutions from which they've graduated, their alma maters, you know. They would like St. Mary's to be like a Stanford, or like a UC Berkeley, or like one of these other institutions, an elite little liberal arts college. And we have a beautiful campus and so forth, and they see, well, this place could be like that. But because there's no reference point for them of Catholic education, it isn't, you know, all bad will. There's no point of reference, and so they don't have any way of understanding what we might aspire to be. So we're facing some really challenging times ahead. We're in the midst of a serious budget crisis. We had to offer early retirement to a bunch of people last year. We lost about 150 people. And, you know, some of those people were replaced with new hires who were much less expensive. But, you know, we're facing some serious times because the day is coming very shortly when the brothers are not going to be able to populate that corporation. And we're going to face the decision as to whether to go to a public juridic person and to try to bring lay people into that group, and what lay people will we bring into the group, and how will they be formed. So there are major issues facing an institution like mine.
Thank you. And thanks to all of us. We had asked the panelists to have some questions for each other, but I know that our time is short, and so I want to begin with you and your questions and thoughts. So if there are either general questions or questions to particular panelists or to Father Dan McDonald, we welcome those. So your thoughts on the models generally or the specifics of thinking in this way about sponsorship.
So this last anecdote is just very sobering to me, because my experience of being at LMU seems like that is the future towards which we're going. Not with the sponsor incorporation, we're incorporated differently, but in terms of hiring faculty that don't have any real, there's no malice, as you said, they don't have any real touchstone with the founding charisms, and their model for what we ought to be is something very different. They're not even looking at other Jesuit schools. They're not looking to Boston College or to Fordham or to Georgetown. They're looking to Stanford or to UCLA or to USC. So I wonder if anyone on the panel, yeah, this is obviously something we can't finish here. Maybe we can talk about it over lunch or something like this. But how does one hire for mission without becoming the sort of exclusivist type of Catholic university that at least is nowhere near in the future of LMU, and it's not what I want for LMU. But I mean, as my colleagues here know, I'm sort of Irish-American, melancholic pessimist by nature. So I wish I could go the sort of hopeful, beautiful route here, but like, that was a sobering finish to the panel from my perspective, because I feel like that's the future that I may see. You know, I'll be 50 this year, but I've got another 20 years in me at LMU, and I think I might see that in my lifetime.
Thank you. Michael, would you?
I think there are some very clear and direct structures that any university can put in place to manage that very well and very positively. And there are articles and books that actually lay out those processes. I think it takes the will of the senior administration and the Human Resource Office to walk down the path of what some schools have done and learn the way to proceed. And our office helps to produce those and to help schools with exactly that. I do think that a number of schools have not put in place what you're asking for, so I don't mean to say it's a simple solution, but I am saying there are very clear tried and true methods that do work well.
I would add to that, that to some degree, right, intentional and incentivized faculty development does, I think, help with this. It's not, I don't want Dan to get mad at me in the back and say that programs are not going to solve all our problems. But, you know, I think, you know, to a certain extent, a lot of what you can do is just is search out openness as opposed to hostility. But then I think if people come in open to the idea of, okay, this is a Catholic university, I might have some concerns about the Catholic tradition, whatever, but sure, cool, right? But if you can then work with them to find ways to bring them as stronger partners in mission and to see this as not inimical to what they want for their career in the university and all that, I think development does help with that. I think that does, in my experience, what I've seen with, you know, fellow relatively new faculty at my institution and with participating in our presidential seminar, is that people, as they kind of feel their way into learning more, can sometimes become a little bit more open than they may have been on the way in.
If I could just respond real briefly, I mean, I'm skeptical that programs on their own will be able to do the work, because you're really hoping that you get people that are not just open, but that will have some sort of experience. So, one great example here, so the dean of my college, the dean of the Development College of Liberal Arts, doesn't come, she came here from Fairfield, so she was incorporated into Jesuit education at one point, but it's not her tradition, right? She's not Catholic, she's not religious even in a second. She's a champion for mission. She is one of the best deans that has been here in the close to 20 years I've been here. She's been great. You can get people that go through programs, go through the Ignatian Colleagues program, do something like that, and come around. But if you get other people who, if their model is Stanford and they go through a 1 or 2 year program, I just feel like we need to hire. The program can't do it all if you don't hire well coming in. Otherwise, it's just lucky.
I would agree with that, yes.
And I would just add to that, it's fine to have lots of people of goodwill, but you also have to have people who know the tradition that you're trying to pass on. It's not enough to say, well, I'm not Catholic, but I like Catholics. You know, you've got to have some people who know the tradition. I have friends who are Catholic.
I
have friends who
So we have 3 questions in the back. Steve, let's start with you, and then we'll go right and left. My right and left.
So I want to address the last thing that was said by my colleague here, and he's heard some of this before. So one of the challenges is to think about the framework that we're addressing these questions. And the last couple of statements have suggested that there is a strong opposition between, let's say, the model of Stanford, and the model, let's say, of Catholic universities like LMU. And so how would you characterize that difference? So just one way to characterize the difference is to talk about the different kinds of trainings that are implicit in the distinction. So, and one of them would be, on the one hand, religious training versus disciplinary training. Okay, and so disciplines of knowledge, disciplines of belief. So what if we thought, instead of seeing those in opposition, how could we come up with a true conversation between those? And think about, and you know, I'm showing my own intellectual affiliations here. Think about Foucauldian notions of embodiment. When we have religious communities trained, we have embodied people. These Jesuits, in this case, are disappearing. But that notion of, it's really important to actually have the presence of somebody trained, embodied in that way. Similarly, what do we have when we're hiring? Most of my teaching has been in public universities, secular universities. We have people embodied, trained in their disciplines. And those seem to be constantly be in conflict. What are the ways of thinking of them in some kind of productive relationship? One would be thinking about those disciplines that do focus on Catholic or Jesuit bodies of knowledge. That's one way of doing it. But there's a whole bunch of other ones. And one of the reasons I participate in ACTI is that the intellectual traditions of Catholicism do speak directly to a whole bunch of different disciplines. And so this is not a solution, but it's just a way of thinking of these not in opposition, but rather in some kind of conversation, and how can we form that conversation in productive ways.
Thank you.
And I just want to say I agree with everything you said, and I didn't mean to suggest that they have to be in opposition, but simply that the people coming to us are people who've been formed entirely in this other model, and so they don't have any point of reference for what a Catholic institution might be.
But the point that I'm trying to make is that it goes both ways. We need to figure out ways, not just to say, where can we find people trained in sociology or that are interested in Catholicism, but what are the kinds of things that we can offer? And I found as getting more and more involved in Jesuit studies, for example, that there are people in disciplines that don't have a Catholic background that are saying there's some intellectual opportunities here that I can extend my own disciplinary work by getting in dialogue with those. And if we thought of higher tradition in a really broad way, you try to figure not only people that already have the knowledge, but people that are going to benefit from coming to our Catholic university in terms of their disciplinary advancement.
Well, that's great. We have someone in the back.
Yeah, I wanted to speak a little bit to the embodiment issue and also what you were talking about, that programs, I think, are going to have a difficult time maintaining distinctive identity. And the reason I think that's true is that the Catholic intellectual tradition is very rich and deep and sophisticated. And I can't see how any, you meet once a month for 2 years, 3 years, that it's impossible for someone to adequately interiorize this sort of rich, sophisticated, 2,000-year tradition. It's just not going to happen. So what's going to happen at best would be a very superficial veneer, and a little bit about St. Ignatius, and a little bit about this, a little bit about that, but nothing profound. And what you need in the university is a high-level discussion. In other words, you can't have that unless the person is very knowledgeable and sophisticated about what they're talking about. So if you bring in people that only have training and knowledge about, outside the Catholic tradition, and there's virtually no bodies, actual people on the ground who have this deep, sophisticated knowledge, you can't have a real conversation. It's just not going to happen because they might say, well, I know when Ignatius was born, and I know, Society of Jesus did this and that, but it's going to be very superficial. And at a university, we don't want to have superficial conversations.
Go to Catherine, and then we had one question back here, and then I think we're going to be at time. Sadly, I'd love to continue this another half hour.
There's so much to be captured in this conversation right now. One, I want to agree with David. We need a critical mass of Catholic intellectuals that can enable us to engage in these conversations. But also, totally agree with Stephen, there's a way that we can engage colleagues that are coming from various disciplines. And I think we've this is kind of preempting my presentation this afternoon, but we've kind of, been sort of throwing around the possibility of interdisciplinary, discourse maybe for our students. I don't know that we've thought deeply about it among ourselves, and how we can have Catholic intellectuals in a space engaging colleagues with disciplinary expertise and openness to learning, right, from colleagues with expertise in the Catholic intellectual tradition, and the kind of rich, unique scholarship that can give birth for them in their own discipline. So there's a richness here that I think we're missing, and I want to name that it's not just the intellectual work, but there is a spirituality and spiritual practice that ought to inform the intellectual work that we do at our Catholic institutions that I don't think we've tapped into just yet in these conversations. And so I kind of put that out there too, in terms of the impact that has and the kinds of conversations we could be having at our institutions as Catholic universities.
Thank you, thank you. Then one last
I
comment.
don't know if there's going to be time to get into it. I just wanted to thank the panel for their insights and their passion. And I really appreciate the dialogue that's been stimulating. I love the model. But I also like the idea of imagining where we can sort of break out the models. So, Dr. Green, I'm intrigued by this idea of the model of inheritance. Right? How do we honor the inheritance that we've received, assuming that some of us will be going that way fairly soon. And I just think that's an avenue for further exploration. I also just want to weigh in terms of the programming versus the substantive dialogue debates. I love both and Catholic vision, but I also, this was a sobering panel for me as well. And I appreciate that. I'm new on the mission side. And I think it's important to look squarely at reality and what the situation is now, and how can the Spirit move us to the next step.
Thank you. Well, that was a perfect end. Appreciate that. And so thanks to our panel, thanks to all of you.